Nina Hartwell here. The afternoon I walked away from my marriage did not involve screaming, tears, or broken dishes. It happened quietly in a coffee shop that once represented everything I believed partnership was supposed to be. James Hartwell, my husband of 9 years, sat across from me at a corner booth. This was the same place where we'd had our first date, the same booth where he once told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. Now it was where we had agreed to say goodbye. He arrived 15 minutes late. No apology, no explanation. His eyes never left his phone. I did not need to ask who he was messaging. I already knew. Sophia Bennett, his colleague, the woman who had gradually replaced me while I was still legally his wife. I ordered his usual coffee order out of habit, not affection. He barely acknowledged it. He sipped absently, scrolled through messages, smiled at his screen, and treated me like an obligation he had already fulfilled. I told him I was leaving Seattle. I told him I was moving to a small mountain town in Colorado to begin again. He finally looked up, surprised for a brief moment, then shrugged. "Whatever works for you," he said. "Sophia and I are moving in together. She understands what I need." That was the moment something inside me went still. I was not furious. I was not devastated. I was simply done. This conversation was not about closure. It was about release, about severing the last invisible thread connecting me to a man who had already written me out of his story. When we stood up, he left cash on the table and walked out without looking back. No goodbye, no acknowledgement, no remorse. I sat there alone, staring at a cup I could not finish, finally understanding the truth. I was not losing a husband. I was reclaiming my life. And that quiet decision would change everything. People often think a marriage ends because of one explosive betrayal, a scandal, a fight, another woman. But my marriage did not collapse in one moment. It dissolved gradually, day by day, until there was nothing left worth saving. When James and I first married, we were partners. We were young, driven, and building everything side by side. I believed in him when others doubted. I supported his career, managed our household, and postponed my own ambitions because I thought that was what love demanded. As his career advanced, something shifted. James began to see himself as the axis around which everything revolved. His work mattered. His stress mattered. His schedule mattered. Mine became flexible, optional, invisible. Conversations turned into directives. Affection turned into absence. I became someone who managed details, not a partner whose voice carried weight. When I talked about my career or my aspirations, he barely acknowledged me. When I was exhausted, he told me I had it easy compared to him. Our marriage became like a building with an impressive facade and a rotting foundation. To outsiders, we looked accomplished, well-groomed, polite, established. But inside, I was living with emotional abandonment that slowly hollowed me out. James did not insult me outright. He did something more damaging. He dismissed me. He made me feel redundant, interchangeable. I learned to stop asking for attention. I learned to stop expecting recognition. I learned to swallow frustration and tell myself this was normal. That marriage required compromise. That love meant perseverance. But there is a difference between compromise and erasure. I was not unhappy because James worked long hours. I was unhappy because I no longer existed in his world as a person. I was an accessory to his achievements, a background character in a narrative he believed was only about him. By the time Sophia appeared, the marriage was already gone. She did not destroy something strong. She filled a space that had been vacant for a very long time. And deep down, I knew it. That realization did not make me enraged. It made me exhausted. When I discovered the truth about Sophia, there was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no tears on the bedroom floor. What I felt in that moment was not anger. It was clarity. I found the messages by chance. James had left his tablet open on the kitchen counter. A notification appeared. Her name, a heart emoji, intimate words that once belonged to me. I read enough to understand everything. They did not communicate like two people who had just crossed a boundary. They spoke like two people already inhabiting a future where I no longer existed. Plans, private jokes, complaints about me, subtle but cutting. I closed the tablet carefully, as if making sound might destroy the fragile composure holding me together. That night, James came home late. He smelled like unfamiliar perfume and hollow confidence. He talked about work. He did not look at me. I did not confront him. I did not ask questions I already knew the answers to. I simply observed. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as my husband, not as the man I once loved, but as someone who had chosen convenience over honesty and ego over commitment. I realized something then. If I screamed, he would deny it. If I cried, he would minimize it. If I pleaded, he would resent me. So I did none of those things. I made my decision quietly. I contacted an attorney the next morning. I collected my documents. I separated what was mine. I stopped sharing my thoughts, my worries, my dreams. James noticed the change, but misinterpreted it. He thought my silence meant acceptance, that I would stay, adapt, settle for less like I always had. He was wrong. I did not leave because of Sophia. I left because I recognized the woman I was becoming if I stayed, smaller, quieter, slowly vanishing. The day I packed my belongings, James asked me why I was being so composed. I told him the truth. Because I am already gone. And this time, I was not returning. I did not announce my departure to anyone. I did not post declarations about healing or independence. I simply left. 2 weeks after that final conversation, I packed my clothes, my personal papers, and a few possessions that still felt like mine. Everything else I left behind. The condo, the furniture, the existence that no longer fit me. I moved to a small mountain town in Colorado called Cedar Ridge. It was the kind of place people drove through, not a destination they chose deliberately. Quiet roads, old cabins, the sound of wind through pine trees. The house I moved into had belonged to my aunt. A modest cottage with a small porch facing the mountains and wildflowers growing along the fence line. She used to tell me that authenticity matters more than appearances. I finally understood what she meant. No one in Cedar Ridge knew who I used to be. No one asked about my marriage. No one cared about my history. I was not James Hartwell's wife here. I was just Nina. The first few weeks were disorienting. The silence felt overwhelming at night. There were moments when I reached for my phone automatically, only to remember there was no one I needed to inform, no one whose approval I was seeking. I slept better. I breathed easier. I walked through the forest in the mornings and let the cold air clear my mind. For the first time in years, my thoughts were not racing to keep pace with someone else's demands. I did not feel isolated. I felt expansive, a space to think, space to remember who I was before I learned how to diminish myself, space to envision a future that did not require permission. People assume starting over is frightening, that it signifies failure. But standing in that quiet cottage with my suitcases still packed, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Relief. Leaving was not escaping. It was choosing myself. And even though I did not know it yet, this quiet town was where my actual life was about to begin. Healing did not arrive instantly. It did not come with revelations or dramatic transformations. It came quietly through routine, through work, through small moments that gradually stitched me back together. After I settled into the cottage, I began searching for employment. I had a degree in landscape architecture and years of experience I had never fully utilized. In my marriage, my career had always been secondary, convenient, adjustable. Here, it finally mattered. I applied to a small design firm in town, Mountain View Landscapes. It was owned by a woman named Sarah Chen. During the interview, she did not ask about my marital status. She did not ask why I left the city. She asked about my vision, my approach, my philosophy. That alone felt transformative. I got the position within a week. Work became my foundation. I woke up early, walked to the office, and lost myself in plans, plantings, and designs. No one interrupted me. No one dismissed my input when I contributed. People listened. Sarah trusted me. She gave me autonomy instead of oversight, collaboration instead of control, respect instead of expectation. Outside of work, my life remained uncomplicated. I cooked for myself. I tended the garden. I read books I had purchased years ago but never had time to finish. My phone stayed silent. And for the first time, that silence felt peaceful, not hollow. I did not discuss James. I did not replay past arguments in my mind. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. Healing was not about erasing the past. It was about no longer inhabiting it. Little by little, I felt stronger, more present, more genuine. The woman who had spent years shrinking herself was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, steadier, and far more certain of her value. I was not rebuilding to prove anything to anyone. I was rebuilding because my life finally belonged to me. The news of James's wedding reached me the way most things from my former life did now, distant, muffled, insignificant. It was my friend Kate who told me. She called one evening while I was preparing dinner, her voice cautious as if she were handling something delicate. "Next month is his wedding," she said. "The big one. Sophia is getting everything she imagined." I waited for a reaction that never materialized. No tightness in my chest, no bitterness, no sadness, just a brief pause. I thanked her for informing me and returned to chopping vegetables. In Seattle, the event was being marketed like a production, a luxury resort, imported decorations, a guest list filled with people James wanted to impress. The kind of wedding designed to demonstrate success rather than celebrate love. Kate kept talking, filling the silence with details she thought might affect me. How expensive the venue was. How Sophia was boasting. How James looked confident, victorious, as if he had achieved something. I listened politely, then interrupted her. "Kate," I said. "I genuinely am fine." And I was. That same day, I spent the morning hiking through the mountains. The air was crisp. The sky was endless. I stopped for lunch at a small cafe where the owner already knew my order. In the afternoon, I worked in the garden. Dirt beneath my fingernails, sunshine on my skin, while they were coordinating entrances and toasts, I was selecting flowers for spring planting. That was when it truly registered. Indifference is not apathy. It is liberation. I did not need to see photographs. I did not need information. Their celebration belonged to them. My life belonged to me. That evening, I invited a few colleagues over for a simple dinner. We talked about projects, about hiking trails, about nothing consequential at all. Laughter filled the cottage my aunt had left me. Somewhere across the country, James was preparing for the most important day of his life. And I was already living mine. For the first time, I understood something precisely. When you stop caring, you stop being manipulated. And that was a triumph no wedding could ever surpass. I thought the story would conclude there. A wedding I did not witness. A life I had already transcended. But sometimes the past makes one final appearance, not to pull you back, but to reveal what was always concealed. The morning after the wedding, Kate called me again. This time, she did not bother softening her tone. "Nina, are you sitting down?" I smiled to myself and took a sip of coffee. I was standing in my kitchen, sunlight streaming across the counter. "I am standing," I said calmly. "What happened now?" "There was an unexpected guest at the wedding," she said. "Someone who knows you." That caught my attention. It turns out James's business partner had invited an old associate, a man named Robert Martinez. Robert had known my aunt years ago, a gregarious man, friendly, the type who spoke more when he drank. Kate said that near the conclusion of the reception, Robert had been sitting at a table with several guests, wine glass in hand, telling stories in a voice loud enough for half the venue to hear. He started talking about a trip to Colorado, about a small mountain town, about encountering his old friend's niece. My chest tightened slightly. He talked about you, Nina, Kate continued. About how well you were doing, about your cottage, your garden, your work. Apparently, someone at the table asked if you were just visiting. Robert laughed and said, "No, she lives there permanently. Her aunt left her the property. She is flourishing." The guests leaned in. Then someone else asked if I was working. Robert waved his hand and said, "Of course she works. Runs a landscape design firm now. Her partner says she just secured them a massive resort contract." Kate paused, letting the silence build. And then she said, "Someone joked that you must be doing well financially." Robert laughed again. "Salary is nothing. That woman is set for life. Her aunt left her a fortune. Millions." I closed my eyes. Kate told me that at that exact moment, James and Sophia were standing nearby, greeting guests. They heard everything. Word by word, table by table, the whisper spread. The ex-wife he discarded was not struggling. She was not broken. She was wealthy, independent, thriving. And the groom was drowning in debt. One casual comment, one unfiltered truth, and the illusion James had spent years constructing began to fracture in front of everyone he wanted to impress. I did not need to be there. The truth had manifested on its own. According to Kate, the atmosphere changed the moment those words landed. At first, James did not respond. He stood frozen, his smile rigid, as if his brain was struggling to process reality. Sophia's hand clenched around his arm, her expression suspended somewhere between shock and calculation. People nearby began whispering, quiet at first, then louder. Heads turned, eyes lingered, phones were forgotten in hands that suddenly wanted to know more. James had built his identity on perception, success, control, superiority, and now in a matter of seconds, that carefully polished image was shattering. Someone laughed uncomfortably. Another guest asked a question that should never be asked at a wedding. "Is that accurate?" James turned toward Sophia. Not tenderly, not lovingly. He looked at her like a man realizing the foundation beneath him was gone. "What did he mean?" James asked, his voice sharp. "About millions?" Sophia tried to smile. She tried to deflect. "You know how intoxicated people exaggerate," she said. But the doubt had already taken hold. Then someone else spoke up. A colleague from the financial sector. He mentioned a rumor about James borrowing money, substantial amounts, just to maintain appearances. That was when James lost composure. His voice elevated. Silverware rattled on tables. He demanded explanations. Sophia tried to pull him away, whispering that people were watching, but it was too late. James grabbed a champagne flute and shattered it in his hand. Blood dripped onto the white tablecloth. Someone gasped. Music ceased. He shouted. Accusations, regrets, fury. All of it erupted at once. "You deceived me," he yelled. "You made me look like a fool." Guests retreated. Parents rushed forward. Staff froze in position. The wedding had transformed into a spectacle no one could ignore. James overturned a table. Dishes crashed to the floor. The cake stood untouched for a brief second, then followed everything else into chaos. Sophia cried. Her perfect gown was ruined. Her veil slipped from her hair. This was the cost of living for appearances. When the image breaks, there is nothing left to hold you together. The man who once believed he had won everything stood in the center of the venue, exposed, humiliated, and completely alone. I was miles away, pruning roses in my garden. And yet, the truth had finally reached him. Not through vengeance, through reality. What happened at the wedding did not stay in that ballroom. According to Kate, videos began circulating before the guests even reached the parking lot. A groom screaming. Tables overturned. Blood on a white tablecloth. A bride crying while people recorded instead of intervening. By morning, the footage was everywhere. James's business associates saw it. Clients saw it. Investors who once praised his discipline and professionalism saw a man who could not control his emotions in public, let alone in a boardroom. Meetings were cancelled. Calls went unreturned. Contracts were quietly withdrawn. No one needed an explanation. Reputation speaks for itself. Within weeks, the company James had built began to crumble. Key employees resigned. They took clients with them. No one wanted to remain loyal to a leader who had become a liability overnight. Sophia disappeared from public view just as quickly. The engagement ring she had displayed so prominently was suddenly never mentioned again. Whispers followed her instead of admiration. Doors closed where they once opened. James tried to salvage what he could. Dinners with potential partners. Promises he could not keep. Apologies that arrived too late. But trust once destroyed does not return on demand. Kate told me he started drinking heavily. That he looked older, thinner, like someone constantly anticipating bad news. I listened without satisfaction. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel pleased. I felt detached. This was not punishment delivered by my hand. It was the natural consequence of choices made in arrogance and secrecy. A life built on illusion eventually collapses under its own weight. People like to call this karma, as if it is something mystical or vindictive. But it is not. It is simply cause and effect. And while James was busy losing everything he thought defined him, I was gaining something far more valuable. Peace. While James's world was contracting, mine was quietly expanding. I stopped receiving updates about him. Not because people stopped talking, but because I stopped listening. His story no longer had a place in my days. I had work to do, a life to build, a version of myself to honor. At the firm, I was entrusted with larger projects. My ideas were not questioned, only refined. When I presented designs, people engaged instead of overlooking me. For the first time in my adult life, my value was measured by my capability, not my compliance. One afternoon, Sarah called me into her office. She thanked me for my contributions, then offered me a partnership and equity in the firm. I remember walking home afterward with a strange feeling in my chest. Pride. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that settles deep and stays. At home, the garden was flourishing. Wildflowers growing higher, vegetables thriving. Every plant felt like evidence that care given consistently creates growth. I spent my evenings reading, cooking, learning new skills. I enrolled in classes I had postponed for years. I traveled alone without explaining myself to anyone. I did not need validation. I did not need witnesses. I realized something important during those months. I had not escaped a bad marriage. I had escaped a version of myself that believed love required sacrifice without boundaries. Freedom did not arrive as revenge. It arrived as ownership. Ownership of my time, my energy, my future. James once told me I would struggle without him. Standing in my kitchen, surrounded by a life I built with my own hands, I finally understood how mistaken he had been. I did not win. I was freed. And that freedom was worth everything I left behind. For a long time, I thought strength meant enduring, staying, proving my commitment by surviving discomfort and silence. I was wrong. Real strength was knowing when to leave without destroying myself in the process. I did not expose James. I did not confront Sophia. I did not orchestrate revenge or wait for karma to manifest. I simply chose a different life. And in doing so, I removed myself from the destruction they were creating. What happened to them was not my victory. It was their consequence. My victory was waking up without anxiety. Working without being diminished. Loving myself without needing permission. I learned that walking away does not mean you lost. Sometimes it means you finally chose yourself. If you are listening to this and you feel invisible in your own life, hear this clearly: you are not weak for being exhausted. You are not broken for wanting peace. And you do not need to stay where you are no longer valued. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence. Sometimes the greatest revenge is a life well lived. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need courage today, and leave a comment below. Are you still holding on, or are you ready to walk away and begin again? Your story matters, too.